A White House bedroom, 1799. Three doctors stand over the most powerful man in the country. He can barely breathe. Their solution is to cut open his arm and drain his blood into a bowl. They do it 4 times. By the end, George Washington has lost roughly 80 ounces of blood, nearly half of what a human body holds. He looks at his doctor and says, "I die hard, but I am not afraid to go." His actual last words, whispered hours later, were simply, "'Tis well." The father of a nation killed not by the disease in his throat, but by the medicine meant to save him.
That is the kind of story we are about to tell. 46 presidents, 46 endings, and not a single one is what you would expect. This is History Lens.
Let me walk you through all of them, starting from the very beginning. Washington likely suffered from epiglottitis, a swelling of the tissue at the base of the tongue that blocks the airway. Today, it takes a simple course of antibiotics to treat. In 1799, the standard treatment was bloodletting, a practice based on the ancient belief that draining blood could rebalance the body. His doctors removed blood 4 separate times over the course of roughly 12 hours. And modern physicians who have reviewed the case believe the blood loss itself was the primary cause of death, not the infection. The second and third presidents share what might be the most extraordinary coincidence in all of American history. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson started as close allies during the Revolution. Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and Adams defended it before Congress. But the election of 1800 turned them into bitter enemies, and they did not speak for over a decade. Then, through the encouragement of mutual friends, they reconnected as pen pals and exchanged letters for the rest of their lives. On July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration of Independence was signed, Jefferson lay dying at Monticello from a combination of diarrhea, pneumonia, and kidney failure. The night before, he asked those around him, "Is it the 4th?" They told him not yet, and he held on through the night. His last recorded words were, "No, doctor, nothing more." Hundreds of miles away in Massachusetts, 90-year-old John Adams was losing his battle with congestive heart failure, completely unaware that Jefferson had already died hours earlier that same morning. Adams whispered his famous final words, "Thomas Jefferson survives." 2 men who built a nation together, fought bitterly, reconciled, and then left the world on the same day, on the birthday of the country they created. James Madison, the 4th president and father of the Constitution, nearly completed an impossible trifecta. His doctors tried desperately to keep him alive until July 4th. But when his niece offered him stimulants, Madison said, "Nothing more than a change of mind, my dear. I always talk better lying down." He died on June 28, 1836, 6 days short of the 4th. James Monroe, the 5th president, did make it. He became the 3rd president to die on Independence Day, passing from heart failure and tuberculosis on July 4, 1831. His last words were about missing his friend Madison. "I regret that I should leave this world without again beholding him." John Quincy Adams refused to retire after his presidency and returned to Congress as a representative from Massachusetts. On February 21, 1848, while casting a vote on the House floor, he suffered a massive stroke, clutched his desk, and collapsed. He was carried to the Speaker's room, where he said, "This is the last of earth. I am content." He died 2 days later, the only former president to die inside the Capitol building. Andrew Jackson survived duels, a presidential assassination attempt, and years of chronic illness before tuberculosis, heart failure, and dropsy finally brought him down. The man who once beat his own would-be assassin with a cane went out with surprising gentleness. His last words to his family were, "Oh, do not cry. Be good children, and we shall all meet in heaven." Martin Van Buren died quietly at 79 from asthma and heart failure, saying, "There is but one reliance," but his successor holds one of the strangest records in presidential history. William Henry Harrison gave a 2-hour inaugural address in freezing rain without a coat, and for over 150 years, the official story was that he caught pneumonia and died 31 days later. However, a study published in the journal Clinical Infectious Diseases concluded that Harrison most likely died of enteric fever, probably typhoid, caused by the contaminated water supply at the White House. In 1841, Washington had no sewer system, and the White House water came from a source just 7 blocks downstream from a public dump of human waste. John Tyler sided with the Confederacy after his presidency and was the only president whose death was not officially mourned by the United States government. He died of a stroke, saying, "Perhaps it is best." James K. Polk died at just 53 from cholera he contracted on a post-presidential tour of the South. His last words to his wife were, "I love you, Sarah. For all eternity, I love you." Zachary Taylor's death remains one of the most debated in presidential history. On July 4, 1850, Taylor consumed a large quantity of raw cherries and cold milk during a sweltering celebration. Within hours, he was violently ill with what doctors called acute gastroenteritis, and he died 5 days later. For decades, historians suspected arsenic poisoning, given the intense political tensions over slavery at the time. In 1991, Taylor's body was exhumed and tested at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. The results showed only 2 parts per million of arsenic, far below the 200 parts per million that would indicate poisoning. It really was just the cherries and the milk, combined with the appalling sanitation conditions of mid-19th century Washington. His last words were, "I am about to die. I expect the summons very soon. I have tried to discharge all my duties faithfully. I regret nothing, but am sorry that I am about to leave my friends." Millard Fillmore died of a stroke after tasting a bowl of soup and declaring, "The nourishment is palatable," which might be the least dramatic final words in presidential history. Franklin Pierce's ending was far darker. After his son was killed in a train accident just weeks before his inauguration, Pierce spiraled into alcoholism and died alone of cirrhosis. No one recorded his final words because no one was there to hear them. James Buchanan died of respiratory infection, saying, "O Lord God Almighty, as thou wilt." And then came Abraham Lincoln, shot in the back of the head by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865. His last words were not some grand statement. He had been holding his wife's hand and said, "She won't think anything about it," referring to what their guest might think of them being affectionate in public. He died the next morning without regaining consciousness. Here is a detail the original story left out. Abraham Lincoln's eldest son, Robert Todd Lincoln, was not at the theater that night, but rushed to his father's deathbed. 16 years later, in 1881, Robert was at the Washington train station when President James Garfield was shot. 20 years after that, in 1901, Robert arrived at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo just as President William McKinley was shot. One man present at or near 3 separate presidential assassinations. After McKinley's death, Robert reportedly said he would never again attend a presidential event, and he largely kept that promise. Garfield's death deserves its own attention because the bullet did not kill him. The assassin, Charles Guiteau, shot Garfield in the back at a train station, but the bullet missed every vital organ. What followed was 80 days of medical horror. Garfield's lead physician, Dr. Willard Bliss, repeatedly probed the wound with unwashed hands and unsterilized instruments, turning a survivable injury into a massive infection. At one point, Alexander Graham Bell was brought in with an experimental metal detector to locate the bullet, but the device kept giving false readings because Garfield was lying on a bed with metal springs that no one thought to remove. Garfield wasted away from infection and blood poisoning, dropping from 210 pounds to 130 pounds before dying on September 19, 1881. His last words were, "Swami, can this pain be stopped?" At Guiteau's trial, the assassin argued that the doctors, not the bullet, killed the president. He was not entirely wrong. Andrew Johnson died from 2 strokes. Ulysses S. Grant, who smoked up to 20 cigars a day, developed throat cancer and spent his final months racing to finish his memoirs so his family would not be left in poverty. His last word was simply water. Rutherford B. Hayes said, "I know that I am going where Lucy is," referring to his late wife. Chester Arthur died of kidney failure at 57 and reportedly whispered, "Life is not worth living." Grover Cleveland said, "I have tried so hard to do right." Benjamin Harrison's lungs failed from pneumonia, and his last words were a desperate, "Are the doctors here?" "Doctor, my lungs." William McKinley, after being shot at a public reception, lingered for 8 days before dying of gangrene. His final words to his wife were, "We are all going. We are all going. God's will be done, not ours." Teddy Roosevelt survived being shot in the chest during a campaign speech in 1912 and gave an 84-minute speech with the bullet still inside him. He later survived a near-fatal expedition through the Amazon, but the accumulated damage weakened him permanently, and he died in his sleep at 60 from a blood clot. His last words were, "Put out the light, James." William Howard Taft's heart gave out at 72 after years of obesity-related strain, with no recorded last words. Woodrow Wilson spent his final years partially paralyzed from a stroke, saying, "I am a broken piece of machinery. When the machinery is broken, I am ready." Warren Harding died of a sudden heart attack while his wife read the newspaper to him. His last words were, "That's good. Go on, read some more." Calvin Coolidge, famously silent in life, was equally brief in death, with his last words being a simple, "Good morning, Robert." Herbert Hoover died at 90 of internal bleeding with no public last words. Franklin Roosevelt, serving his 4th term while battling heart disease, hypertension, and the secret paralysis of polio, suffered a massive stroke at his Georgia retreat. His last words were, "I have a terrific pain in the back of my head." Truman died in a coma with no final words. Eisenhower, after multiple heart attacks, said directly, "I want to go. God, take me." John F. Kennedy was killed instantly by a sniper's bullet in Dallas on November 22, 1963. His last words, spoken seconds before the shot, were a response to Nellie Connolly, who said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy replied, "No, you certainly can't." He was 46 years old. Lyndon Johnson called for his Secret Service agent as a heart attack struck. "Send Mike immediately." Those were his last words. Nixon, at 81, suffered a massive stroke and yelled, "Help!" before slipping into a coma. Gerald Ford died peacefully at 93 with no public last words. Jimmy Carter became the longest-lived president in American history, reaching 100 years old before dying peacefully on December 29, 2024. In his final weeks, he told his family he was ready to see Rosalind again, his wife of over 77 years, who had died just a month earlier. Ronald Reagan passed at 93 after a decade with Alzheimer's, with no lucid final words. George H.W. Bush's last phone call was to his son, the other President Bush, where he said simply, "I love you too," before dying at 94. 8 presidents died while in office, 4 were assassinated, and 4 died of natural causes. The youngest was Kennedy at 46. The oldest was Carter at 100. 2 died on the exact same day, the 50th birthday of the nation they helped build. One man's son witnessed 3 assassinations, and one president was killed not by a bullet but by the doctors who treated him. Every ending tells a story, and across 250 years of American history, those stories are stranger, sadder, and more human than any textbook ever captures.
Thank you for watching. This has been History Lens. If stories like this make you see history differently, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what they left out of the books.